They say that history is written by the victors. But what if the truth, the real, stomach-churning truth, is written in the decay of the dead? For centuries, Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, lay undisturbed in her lead coffin, a symbol of England's golden age. But when her tomb was finally opened, the story it told was not one of glory, but of a horror so profound it was buried again, this time under layers of secrecy. This is the story of what they found inside Queen Elizabeth I's coffin. A truth far more horrifying than you can imagine. The year is 1868. A thick, damp chill clung to the air within the royal vault of Westminster Abbey, a cold that seeped into the bones of the small, select group of men gathered there. Dean Arthur Stanley, a man of God and a scholar of history, stood with a lantern held high, his face a mask of solemn anticipation. Beside him, Dr. William Hartley, a renowned anatomist with a stomach of steel, and a handful of hardened workmen, their faces grim under the flickering light. They were about to commit an act of sacrilege, or so it felt. They were about to open the tomb of the Virgin Queen. For weeks, whispers had circulated through the hallowed halls of the Abbey. Rumors of strange noises emanating from the royal vault, of a foul stench that defied explanation. Dean Stanley, a man of reason, had dismissed them as old wives' tales. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until he could no longer ignore them. He had to know. For the sake of history, for the sake of the Abbey itself, he had to see. The workmen, with hushed reverence, pried open the heavy stone slab that sealed the tomb. A cloud of stale, musty air billowed out, carrying with it a scent so vile, so unnatural, that several men gagged and recoiled. It was the smell of ancient death. Yes, but there was something else, something metallic and cloying, a sweetness that turned the stomach. Inside, 2 lead coffins lay stacked one atop the other. The top one, simple and unadorned, belonged to Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, but it was the one beneath that held their attention. The coffin of Elizabeth I, the mighty Gloriana. The lead was buckled and warped, as if something inside had struggled to break free. A dark, viscous liquid seeped from the seams, staining the stone floor beneath. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Dr. Hartley, ever the professional, knelt down, his gloved fingers tracing the grotesque contours of the coffin. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his voice a low rumble. "This is not normal decomposition." He was right. What they were about to find would defy all known science, all historical record. It would rewrite the legacy of a queen and haunt the minds of those who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. For inside Queen Elizabeth I's coffin, a horror born of vanity, fear, and a botched attempt at immortality had been festering for centuries, waiting to be unleashed. To understand the horror of her end, one must first understand the legend of her life. Elizabeth I was a monarch forged in fire. She ascended to the throne of a divided and bankrupt England, a Protestant queen in a Catholic world, a woman in a man's domain. For 45 years, she ruled with an iron will and a brilliant mind, transforming her beleaguered nation into a global power. She was Gloriana, the fairy queen, a living goddess to her people. Her image was carefully crafted, a tapestry of power and purity. Her portraits depicted her in magnificent gowns, her face a mask of serene authority, her virginity a symbol of her devotion to her country. She was the Virgin Queen, married to England, her people, her children. This carefully constructed image was a shield, a weapon in a world of political intrigue and religious strife. But behind the mask of majesty, there was a woman who had witnessed the brutal execution of her own mother, who had been imprisoned in the Tower of London, who had lived her life under the constant threat of assassination and rebellion. Elizabeth was a survivor, a pragmatist, a master of deception. She played her suitors against each other, using the promise of marriage as a diplomatic tool. She surrounded herself with loyal and brilliant advisors, but she trusted no one completely. She was a queen who understood the power of symbols, of myths, of a well-told lie. And the greatest lie of all, the lie that would ultimately lead to the horror in her coffin, was the lie of her own immortality. Not a literal immortality, of course, but the immortality of her legacy, of her image, of her undying glory. She was determined to be remembered as the greatest monarch England had ever known, a queen who had defied death itself. But death, as Elizabeth knew all too well, is the great equalizer. It comes for queens and commoners alike, and it has no respect for legends. In the winter of 1603, the legend of Elizabeth I began to crumble. The once vibrant queen, who had danced and hunted with the energy of a woman half her age, was now a frail, withered old woman. Her body was racked with pain, her mind haunted by the ghosts of her past. She refused to go to bed, convinced that if she lay down, she would never rise again. For weeks, she stood or sat on cushions on the floor, her ladies-in-waiting propping her up, their faces etched with exhaustion and pity. The court physicians, helpless in the face of her stubbornness, could only watch as she slowly faded away. In her delirium, she spoke of visions. She saw her own body, small and shrunken, lying in a fire. She saw strange, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of her chamber. She spoke of a great and terrible darkness, a darkness that was waiting to claim her. Her courtiers, ever the opportunists, whispered amongst themselves. They saw not a dying queen, but a vacant throne. They sent secret letters to James VI of Scotland, the Protestant heir, assuring him of their loyalty. They began to plan for a new reign, a new era, while the old one was still breathing its last, agonizing breaths. Elizabeth, even in her weakened state, was not blind to their machinations. She saw the vultures circling, and it filled her with a cold, desperate rage. She had ruled this nation for nearly half a century, and she would not be discarded like a worn-out glove. She would die on her own terms, in her own time, but her body betrayed her. Her legs, swollen and black with dropsy, could no longer support her. Her throat, raw and infected, made it impossible to swallow. Her famous red hair, a wig she had worn for decades, had been removed, revealing a sparse, gray thatch. The layers of white lead and vermilion she had used to paint her face for so long had cracked and peeled, revealing the ravaged skin beneath. She was no longer Gloriana, the Virgin Queen. She was a dying animal, trapped in a cage of her own making, surrounded by enemies who were waiting for her to fall. On the 24th of March, 1603, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Elizabeth I finally succumbed. She died alone, her last breath a faint, rattling sigh. The golden age of England was over. The horror was about to begin. The moment Elizabeth's heart ceased to beat, her body ceased to be her own. It became a problem, a political liability, a grotesque symbol of the transition of power. James VI of Scotland was already on his way to London to claim his throne, and the court needed to present a united front, an image of seamless succession. There was no time for proper mourning, no time for sentiment. There was only the grim, practical matter of dealing with the royal corpse. The embalming process, a tradition reserved for the highest echelons of society, was not a gentle art in Tudor England. It was a brutal, medieval butchery, performed with a haste and a crudeness that would have horrified the ancient Egyptians. And the embalming of Queen Elizabeth I was to be a particularly gruesome affair. The sergeant surgeon, a man named Robert Pavey, was summoned to the death chamber. He was a hardened man, accustomed to the sight of blood and viscera, but even he was taken aback by the state of the Queen's body. The dropsy had caused it to swell to an alarming size, and the stench of decay was already palpable. He and his assistants set to work immediately. They stripped the Queen's body naked, a final, humiliating indignity for the Virgin Queen. Then, with a long, sharp knife, Pavey made a deep incision from her chest to her groin, slicing through layers of fat and muscle. One by one, the organs were ripped from her body cavity. The heart, the lungs, the stomach, the intestines. They were placed in a large cauldron, to be boiled with spices and herbs, a macabre stew that would be sealed in a separate lead box and buried with the Queen. The brain, the seat of the brilliant mind that had outwitted the greatest rulers of Europe, was extracted in a particularly barbaric fashion. A long metal rod was inserted through the nasal cavity, breaking through the delicate cribriform plate. The embalmers then proceeded to whisk the brain into a liquid slurry, which was drained out through the nose. The hollowed-out corpse was then washed with wine and vinegar and stuffed with a mixture of myrrh, frankincense, aloes, and sawdust, a grotesque parody of a Christmas goose. The incision was sewn up with thick, crude stitches, and the body was wrapped in layers of linen, soaked in more spices and preservatives. The face, now a sunken, skull-like mask, was rebuilt with wax and plaster. A new red wig was placed upon the head, and the body was dressed in magnificent robes of state. From a distance, she might have passed for the living queen, sleeping peacefully. But up close, the illusion was horrifying. The wax was already beginning to melt and crack, and the stench of decay, mixed with the cloying sweetness of the spices, was overpowering. The embalmers had done their work. They had created a grotesque effigy, a hollowed-out shell of a queen, ready to be presented to a nation that was about to be plunged into a new era of uncertainty. But they had also created something else, something far more sinister. They had created a ticking time bomb, a chemical reactor, a horror that would lie dormant for centuries, waiting for the moment of its terrible unveiling. The state funeral of Queen Elizabeth I was a spectacle of unparalleled grandeur. For 4 hours, the funeral procession snaked its way through the streets of London, from Richmond Palace to Westminster Abbey. Thousands of citizens lined the route, weeping genuine tears for the queen they had known and loved for so long. At the head of the procession was a magnificent chariot, drawn by 4 horses draped in black velvet. Atop the chariot, on a bed of purple satin, lay the effigy of the queen, a lifelike figure carved from wood and wax, dressed in the robes of Parliament. Her face, painted to a semblance of its former glory, was serene and majestic. Her hands, clasped in prayer, held a golden orb and scepter. It was a masterpiece of deception, a carefully crafted lie designed to reassure a nation that was teetering on the brink of chaos. But for those in the know, for the courtiers who had witnessed the queen's agonizing death and the brutal embalming that followed, the procession was a macabre parade. They knew that the beautiful effigy was a hollow sham, that the real queen, or what was left of her, was a bloated, leaking corpse, stuffed with spices and seeping a foul, toxic brew. They knew that the grand funeral was not a celebration of a glorious reign, but a desperate attempt to cover up a gruesome reality. The procession finally reached Westminster Abbey, and the coffin was carried inside, to the sound of trumpets and the chanting of the choir. The Archbishop of Canterbury delivered a long and eloquent sermon, praising the Queen's virtues, her wisdom, her devotion to her people. He spoke of her as a saint, a martyr, a queen who had ascended to heaven to sit at the right hand of God. But even as he spoke, a strange and unsettling phenomenon was taking place in the royal vault below. The lead coffin, under the pressure of the building gases within, began to buckle and groan. A dark, viscous liquid began to seep from the seams, a liquid that was a mixture of bodily fluids, embalming chemicals, and dissolved royal flesh. The attendants, their faces pale with terror, hastily sealed the vault, hoping to contain the horror within. But it was too late. The secret of Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was already beginning to leak out, a dark stain that would spread through the annals of history, a gruesome reminder that even the greatest of monarchs are ultimately subject to the same inexorable laws of decay. For 265 years, the royal vault of Westminster Abbey remained sealed, its secrets hidden from the world. But in the autumn of 1868, a series of strange and unsettling events forced Dean Arthur Stanley to confront the dark legacy of the Tudor queen. It began with a smell, a faint, sweet, cloying odor that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the Henry VII chapel. The Abbey workers, at first, dismissed it as the smell of old incense, of damp stone, of the accumulated dust of centuries. But the smell grew stronger, more pervasive, until it became a constant, sickening presence. Then came the noises, a series of strange, guttural sounds that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Gurgling, hissing, and, most disturbingly of all, a sound that some described as a faint, desperate knocking. The rumors spread like wildfire, and soon, the abbey was in a state of panic. The workers refused to enter the chapel, convinced that it was haunted by the ghost of the Virgin Queen. The tourists, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, flocked to the abbey in unprecedented numbers, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal ghost. Dean Stanley, a man of science and reason, was at his wits' end. He knew that there had to be a logical explanation for the strange phenomena, but he could not ignore the growing sense of unease that was gripping the abbey. He had to act. He assembled a team of experts: Dr. William Hartley, the renowned anatomist, a team of geologists to examine the abbey's foundations, and a group of brave and well-paid workmen. Their mission: to open the royal vault and uncover the source of the strange disturbances. The work began at dawn, under a gray and drizzling sky. The workmen, their faces grim, began to pry open the heavy stone slab that sealed the tomb. As the slab was lifted, a cloud of foul, noxious gas erupted from the vault, a gas so toxic that several of the men were overcome and had to be carried out into the fresh air. Dr. Hartley, his face protected by a primitive breathing apparatus, was the first to enter the vault. He descended into the darkness, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. The sight that met his eyes would haunt him for the rest of his life. The vault was in a state of utter chaos. The lead coffins of the Tudor monarchs, once arranged in neat, orderly rows, were now scattered and broken, their contents a grotesque jumble of bones, rotting fabric, and a strange, black, tar-like substance. And in the center of the vault, in a pool of this foul, viscous liquid, lay the coffin of Queen Elizabeth I. It was no longer a coffin, but a grotesque, pulsating sack, its lead skin stretched and distorted, as if it were about to burst. Dr. Hartley, his heart pounding in his chest, approached the coffin. He could hear a faint, rhythmic thumping from within, a sound that was disturbingly, horrifyingly alive. He knew that what he was about to do was an act of desecration, but he had to know. He had to see what lay inside. With a trembling hand, he took a metal saw and began to cut through the lead. The moment the saw pierced the lead, a jet of foul, black liquid shot out, spattering Dr. Hartley's face and clothes. The stench was so overwhelming that even through his breathing apparatus, he gagged and retched. But he persevered, driven by a morbid curiosity that was stronger than his revulsion. He cut a small, square opening in the lead and peered inside. The sight that met his eyes was so grotesque, so beyond the realm of human comprehension, that he almost fainted. There was no body, no skeleton, no recognizable human form. There was only a writhing, pulsating mass of black, tar-like substance, a substance that seemed to be alive, to be breathing, to be generating its own heat. And in the center of this living, breathing mass, suspended in a web of black, sinewy fibers, was a heart that was not made of flesh and blood, but of a strange, crystalline substance, a substance that glowed with a faint, purple light. Dr. Hartley, his mind reeling, stumbled back from the coffin, his lantern falling to the floor and extinguishing, plunging the vault into darkness. But the purple glow from the crystalline heart continued to pulsate, a faint, rhythmic beacon in the suffocating blackness. The story of what was found in Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was too shocking, too grotesque, to be released to the public. Dean Stanley, in a desperate attempt to contain the scandal, ordered the vault to be sealed immediately. He swore his team to secrecy, and the official report of the investigation was suppressed, locked away in the Abbey archives, to be seen by no one for 100 years. But the truth, as it always does, eventually found a way to leak out. The workmen, their minds scarred by what they had seen, whispered their stories in the taverns of London. The scientists, their notebooks filled with strange and disturbing observations, shared their findings with their colleagues in hushed, secret meetings. And so, the legend of the cursed tomb of Queen Elizabeth I was born. A legend that would be passed down through generations, a gruesome bedtime story for the children of London. But it was not until the 20th century, when the Abbey archives were finally opened, that the full horror of what was found in the coffin was revealed. The scientific analysis of the samples taken from the vault confirmed Dr. Hartley's worst fears. The black, tar-like substance was a unique and horrifying form of adipocere, a waxy substance that is formed from the decomposition of body fats. But in Elizabeth's case, the process had been grotesquely accelerated by the toxic mixture of embalming chemicals and bodily fluids, creating a living, breathing, self-sustaining ecosystem of decay. The crystalline heart was even more shocking. It was a bizarre and previously unknown chemical compound, a fusion of lead, mercury, arsenic, and organic matter, a toxic jewel that had been forged in the pressure cooker of the sealed coffin. The investigation had revealed a truth that was far more horrifying than any ghost story. It had revealed that Queen Elizabeth I, the great and glorious Virgin Queen, had not been laid to rest in a peaceful slumber, but had been condemned to an eternity of grotesque, self-perpetuating decay, her body a living, breathing monument to the vanity and folly of a queen who had tried to cheat death. The discovery in Queen Elizabeth I's tomb sent shockwaves through the scientific and historical communities. The established narrative of the Tudor era, of the glorious reign of the Virgin Queen, was shattered. The sanitized image of the past was replaced by a gruesome reality of decay, of corruption, of a horror that had been hidden for centuries. The Victorian society, with its elaborate mourning rituals and its belief in the dignity of death, was deeply disturbed by the findings. The idea that a great monarch could suffer such a grotesque fate was a direct challenge to their own carefully constructed notions of order and propriety. The medical community, in particular, was shaken to its core. The case of Queen Elizabeth I led to a complete revision of mortuary science, a new understanding of the complex and unpredictable nature of decomposition. The old, brutal methods of embalming were abandoned, replaced by a more scientific and humane approach. The story of the cursed tomb also had a profound impact on popular culture. The image of the crystalline heart, the living, breathing mass of decay, became a staple of Gothic horror, a symbol of the dark and terrifying secrets that lie hidden beneath the surface of history. But the greatest legacy of the discovery in Queen Elizabeth I's tomb is a more personal, a more intimate one. It is a legacy that is carried in the hearts and minds of all who know the story, a legacy that forces us to confront our own mortality, our own inevitable decay. For the story of Queen Elizabeth I is not just a story about a long-dead monarch. It is a story about us, about our own desperate attempts to cheat death, to create a legacy that will outlive our own frail and fleeting lives. We build monuments, we write books, we create works of art, all in the hope that we will be remembered, that we will not be forgotten. But the story of Queen Elizabeth I reminds us that in the end, all our achievements, all our glories, all our carefully constructed legacies will be reduced to the same basic elements, the same inevitable process of decay. We are all, in a sense, future corpses, future chemical reactions, waiting for our own moment of dissolution. And that, perhaps, is the most horrifying and the most liberating truth of all. The tourists still flock to Westminster Abbey, their cameras flashing, their voices a low, reverent murmur. They gaze up at the magnificent vaulted ceilings, at the stained glass windows that cast a kaleidoscope of colors on the ancient stone floors. They stand before the tomb of Queen Elizabeth I, their guidebooks filled with stories of her glorious reign, of her courage, of her unwavering devotion to her people. They are unaware, of course, of the horror that lies just a few feet beneath their feet. They are unaware of the pulsating, crystalline heart, of the writhing, black mass of decay, of the terrible secret that is locked away in the royal vault. But sometimes, when the abbey is quiet, when the last of the tourists have gone, a strange and unsettling sound can be heard, a faint, rhythmic thumping that seems to come from deep within the earth. It is the sound of a heart that has been beating for over 400 years, a heart that is a testament to the enduring power of a queen who refused to be forgotten, a heart that is a reminder that even in death, some horrors, some legends, can never truly be laid to rest. Thank you for watching Silent Atrocities. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more true hidden history stories.